Tuck, tuck, tuck. Tuck, 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 tuck. So we're back where we left off last time, and I'm just going to pull this up in a new tab. Let me see, I guess there's nothing I can do. Put it in Word. Oh, I'll put it here too. So if you're looking for a URL, there you go.
Just clone it.
Yeah, just pull that up and then clone it, and off you go with a brand new little app, and any changes you make to it are yours. I mean, log it in, of course. But yeah, clone it right off the bat.
You did. You're not.
Can you go back? Okay, thank you.
So last time, what we focused on and spent quite a bit of time on is this notion of calling a function and passing information to that function. So I'd like to continue with that, but what we'd like to add to that mix is the notion of returning values back from a function. So before we do that, I just want to do a little quick review, if you will, of just functional notation. And functional notation is introduced in some algebra class, but it's not like it's advanced math. But let's just do a real quick example. If I say, if I have a function f, and that function takes a parameter x, I can then define the function using mathematical notation to say something like, you know, x times x. So this would be a squaring function. I could later, if I wanted to use this in an expression, I could say something like f of 3 plus f of 2, and say, you know, what is the result of that? And of course, to do that, you'd pass the 3 into your function, which would be equivalent of 3 times 3, so that'd be 9, of course, plus 2 times 2 would be 4, of course, and the result of that, of course, would be 13. And so it's really just a substitution principle. You know, when you have your function definition with a parameter, that is what they would refer to, as I indicated last time, as the formal parameters. Like the definition is the formal definition of our function. When we actually call the function, they refer to that as the actual parameter. You substitute the 3 in throughout the function definition, and of course the result is, in that case, is 9. Then we do the same thing, and we substitute the 2 in, and of course 2 times 2 is 4. And so then we wind up using those values to actually evaluate the expression, and the result of that is 13. It's exactly the same in programming languages. There's nothing different about it. So in this particular case, these functions do return a value. Now we don't have to use a return statement when we notice when we look at the format that mathematicians use. It's implied that f of 3 is calling a function and the result of that function call is returned back. That's implied in the function definition. They don't say return x times x. They just assume that that's the value you get back is by substituting the 3 times 3 and you get back 9. Well, in programming, we actually almost always have an explicit return keyword that's used to return the value. Very common to use that return keyword. So we're going to go ahead and just write a function, a simple function that actually returns a value, and we're going to take a look at that. Now, at this point, our HTML, the click me button is going to call the go function. And right now, if I hit the click me button, it does this strange thing here with whatever this function 2 is. So we're going to just ignore that. In fact, we could delete a bunch of this stuff, I suppose, because we have the old URL that still has all this. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Why don't we get rid of all these extra gewgaws and goodies that we've done for practice, but we'll leave our little library routines. Our little library routines like the clear for clearing the output box and is number for testing to something to see if it's a number or not, and then the show directions option, and then we've got get input that takes an input box ID. So we're gonna jazz this up a little bit, and I'm gonna just simply put in a little comment line right here that says, library functions below, don't delete. And we can maybe, put a little larger comments on here to really indicate that we don't want to get rid of that stuff down below. And then the rest of these things are all things where we were just practicing, but that's in our older bin, and so I can get rid of all this stuff. I don't need it anymore. So I'm going to get rid of all this practice stuff we did. And now I've just got my go function, and I'm going to get rid of the body of the go function. And I could just try a quick print line to make sure I'm a happy camper. It clicked me, it says happy camper, so it appears that everything's working properly. And so I've gotten rid of all the extra stuff that might confuse the matter. Now again, refreshing our memory about these various functions that we have created is not a bad idea. If we want to use the input, if we want to use the get input, we have to remember that we have to pass in the ID of our input boxes, which I think we called in1 and in2. So I'm going to try that real quickly here. I'm going to put a space right in my happy camper string. Then I'm going to say plus get input, pass it in1, and I'm going to see if that works. I'm sort of winging it here, so I'm going to put something in my first input box right there. Just say you put the string yes in there and say get input in1, and if it works, it should say happy camper yes. And it didn't. I mean, happy camper works, but my get input it's just called in. Okay. So in and click, and now it said happy camper there, but it didn't show me anything. So I'm like, what? I mean, it worked, but it didn't give me what I wanted. I'm going to go take a look at my HTML. Oh. There's not one thing, it's another, right? I didn't put anything in my input box. All right, now let's try it again. That's better. Okay. Now notice I said in there, and I wanted to do in1 because I have two input boxes, so my natural inclination was to think this is input box 1 and input box 2. So since that was my natural inclination, I'm going to go back to my input boxes in my HTML, and I did do in2, but I didn't do in1, so that wasn't very consistent, so I'm going to call that in1. So now when I want to get my input boxes, I have to remember in1 and in2. And that's a much better way to go, probably for me to remember that, my feeble mind here. But I want you to notice, here is a nice example of a function call that has both a parameter and a return value. So we already have this function, so let's just go take a look at that function. You notice that you can see that it has a parameter because I'm passing it the ID string here. And so that's the actual parameter. The actual parameter in this case is going to be in1. And so if we go down and look at our getInput function, which is right here, you'll notice the getInput function, there's the formal parameter, which represents the ID of a text box. Here I use that formal parameter ID, and the example above, the actual parameter was in1. So it puts in1 right there, so it goes out, gets the element in1, grabs its value, and then the return statement says to return the value of this expression right here. It's not returning the element because I asked it to get the value of that element, and that's what gets returned.
So whatever ends up in the input is going to end up in your output.
Yeah, so whatever is in my input field of the ID that I pass in, the value of that, whatever's in that box, is going to be returned. And when it gets returned, as you can see up here in our go statement, when it gets returned, it's a substitution mechanism. That whole business you see right there is replaced with the value that gets returned from that function call. So whatever I put into my input box gets returned and is tagged on to the end of Happy Camper. So does that make sense? So what I'd like to do is I'd just like to do some more simple examples of this. And so we're going to do some really simple examples that seem kind of trivial. So we're going to say print line, and we're going to just create a function called add. And I want to add two numbers together, so I'm going to pass it two numbers. And in fact, I might want to put a little prompt so the user knows what they're seeing in the output. So I'm going to put a little prompt that shows that I'm doing this addition thing. So I'm going to call this add function. Well, we don't have an add function, so obviously if I try to run this right now, it isn't going to run. It just does my Happy Camper thing, and I didn't even put anything in my box, but it doesn't add anything together because I don't have a function called add. So we're going to go ahead and create a function called add. So it's a very simple matter. We're just going to call function to add. How many parameters do I need? How many formal parameters? That's right. And I'm going to label these num1 and num2. Because I am doing addition, I want that to look like numbers. And then all I need to say is return, and I'm going to just add those two numbers together. Num1 plus num2, and that couldn't get any simpler. So essentially the idea here is that my actual parameters in this case are 3 and 5. My formal parameters are called num1 and num2. The way that parameters are transferred to a function is by the order they're stated in the parameter list. So num1 in this case is going to get one value. What value? It's going to get the 3. That's correct. And num2 is going to get the 5 because of the order they're stated in the parameter list. It's a one-to-one correspondence. The 3 goes down and gets dropped into num1. The 5 goes down and gets dropped into num2. So we go ahead and run that, and notice it gives us the answer 8. Now what's nice about these functions, of course, I'm going to copy that print line statement that I just have there. I'm going to copy that print line statement. I'm going to paste it a couple of times, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to put in some alternative numbers here. And I'm going to go ahead and run this, and indeed, it'll do all those additional additions for us. and we check our math, and it looks like it's doing the right thing. Now, the big idea here, and it's not real obvious to a lot of beginning programmers, the big idea is that this function now can be reused over and over again to simply add two numbers together. And here we have our formal parameters, and we add two numbers together. What would happen, for instance, if I pass in a third parameter? What do you think it's going to do? Think it'll run? Okay, does anybody think that it's not going to run? Okay, we got one voter for that one. And Paul said no a minute ago, and now he's changing his mind, I guess. We got two votes that it won't run. Anybody else want to jump on that? All right. Okay, so if we think it's going to run, what's it going to print? 48. How many people think it's going to run and print 48? Okay, I got a small number. And those of you who have not either raised your hand before, you need to tell me what do you think it's going to do. You don't know?
I think maybe 48.
All right.
I was losing my computer.
Okay. Anything else? You didn't raise your hand?
34.
48. So since it ran and it actually printed 48, what do you think it did with that 34? It just ignored it. That's right. It just ignored it. It didn't have a placeholder for it down here in the formal parameter list, and so it didn't have a home for that 34. But JavaScript does not have a problem with this. It just ignored it. Now let's try another example. Let's go ahead and add another print line. And this time, let's forget to pass one of the parameters. We only pass in a 3. Now what's it going to print?
3.
This is an interesting one. And now you're all tempted just to run it so you can tell me what it's going to do and look like you're really smart. Well, when it gets down here, the 3 is going to go where? It's going to go into num1, and there is nothing to drop into num2, so what's the value of num2? It'll be undefined. Because when you don't assign a value to a variable, what is going to be the value of that variable? Undefined. Now what's going to happen when we take num1 and try to add it to undefined? We could get a variety of answers there. You could get NaN saying that's not a number, because you can't add a 2 to undefined. You could get a string concatenation thing going on where it tries to take the 3, and append it to the word undefined, concatenate it. You could just get undefined in general, not a number. So we'll take the number 3 and try to add it to undefined, and you get NaN. Now, is there a way we could keep that from happening and maybe print an error message instead?
Yeah.
What could we do?
Define not a letter.
We could check num1 and num2, right? We could say if is number, remember we have that nice little library function we wrote? Down here, there it is right there. Is number that returns true or false. I could just actually put a return in there on my comment so that we actually can see that. Return true or false as appropriate. So now we have this nice little function that's going to return true or false based on whether something's a number. Well, let's go back up and try and see if we can use that. So here we go. If is number num1 and, that's double ampersand means and, is number num2, then what do we want to do? We want to do the addition, right? We say return num1 plus num2. Else, what do we want to return? You know, bad input to add. Error message, basically saying pretty explicitly what happened here. Bad input to the add function. Missing semicolon. Now, what are we returning right here? We're returning a string right here. What are we returning up here if they're numbers? A number. Now, this is another important point. JavaScript does not declare data types really anywhere, and so this function is not specified to be returning a specific type of data. This function can return either a number or a string, just depending on what is we ever return from this function. So you'll notice that if it gets two good input values, it returns a number. If it gets bad input values, it returns a string. Whatever. All right, let's see what happens when I just run it. Oh, it gave us the output we expected. Bad input to add. I like that. So we've improved our add function a little bit here, because now if the user calls it with bad input, it actually returns something. It doesn't necessarily return what they were expecting probably, but it does return something. And the actual return value could be used by the person using this function. So we could put a little comment on here that says, pass in two values to add together. And then we could say if numeric input return sum, else return error string. So now we've jazzed up our comment here to specify a number of pieces of information that are important. One is it indicates how many values it's expecting to be passed. We could actually say pass in two numeric values to add together. So it specifies how many values to pass. It specifies what it expects the type is that it's getting. It tells you what it's going to return if it gets good input, and it tells you what it's going to return if it gets bad input. So there's a lot of information in this comment about how this function is going to behave. This is the kind of documentation you want to provide for a function. You want to tell people what it's expecting to get. You want to tell them what it's going to give you back if it gets the right inputs, and generally what's it going to do if it gets bad input. That's an important thing to know when you're calling a function. Now, another thing I want you to recognize about this function, and again, I can't stress enough, this is a really simple function, right? It has a couple numbers in, we're just adding them together. But what can go wrong with a simple function like this? Well, it might get too few inputs. It might get the wrong type of inputs. Lots of things can go wrong. But one of the things I want you to notice is this function is not doing output, external output to the console in any way. This function is outputting back into the program itself. If this function did external output to the console or to a text box, the user of this function, a person calling this function, would have no control over that. They would have no control over it outputting to the console or to a text box or something else. And the user maybe doesn't want any output to happen when they call this function. So you need to be thoughtful about the functions you write. Are they really general purpose? And if you start doing output to an external device in your function bodies, well, the user of your function would maybe have no control over that, and they're going to say, well, I don't want it to do that. I'm going to have to write my own function. Whereas if all you have the function do is return back to the user the result of running that function, then they can decide what to do with that result. They can decide to put it into an output box or output to the console, or they can use that return to do something else, like continue a computation, or maybe deal with the error by some other mechanism. You generally want your function to return values unless the function is explicitly designed to talk to the outside world in some fashion. And of course, our print and our print lines are designed specifically to do output. But in most cases, you want your function to return a value. Okay, any questions then about this particular case? We have another example of a function that takes a parameter and actually returns a value. And we're using it. The formal parameter list here says, oh, you're probably supposed to pass a number down, but you know, you can pass anything you want. And this function will return true if the actual parameter is a number. It'll return false if the actual parameter is not a number. And then we can use that true and false value we get back in our if statement. I want you to notice also that I put the curly braces on my if. That's a basic rule of thumb. Please, anytime you have an if statement or an else statement or an else if, but anytime you got an if, it's the same rule. Put your curly braces on, even if you only have a single statement in the body of that if or that else. I got email from more than a few people over this past weekend that had some difficulties with code because they weren't putting the curly braces on the if and the else. Even with a single statement, still put the curly braces on. Sometimes your logic can get a little bit screwed up. It's easy to screw it up if you're using curly braces sometimes and not other times. Okay, any questions on this? So the basic idea of a function then, we've pretty much kind of covered the basic format of a function. Let me just put in a kind of a template, if you will. So the basic idea then of a function is keyword function, the name of your function, a parameter list, and then the body of your function, and the body of the function may or may not return a value. That's optional.
The body just doesn't work, right?
The body of the function are the statements in your function. Yeah, if you don't have a body in your function, what's your function do? Nothing. Is it legal? Yeah, you can call it. It just won't do anything. So the return value here, I would say, this is optional. You can have a function that doesn't return anything. And we have a couple of examples in our code here where the function doesn't return anything. Our print and print line functions don't return anything back to the program itself. They output to the external device. They don't take anything back to the program itself. So you'll notice then, print, no return statement. Print string, no return statement. Print line, same story there.
But it's still telling it compute, right?
They have what I would say is the body of the function with no return statement. A quirk of JavaScript, if you have a function with no return value. Let me show you. This will be a little bizarre. But here's our go function. Let me show you something weird. What if I say print line and I embed the print line inside a print line? Now, is that a legal statement? Yeah, it is. Because println is a function. Remember, we wrote a function called println. That's a function. We are going to call that function. And you can see right here, here's the function call println. Well, what does that function return? Is there a return statement in our println function? We were just looking at it a minute ago. Hello? Do you see a return statement in my println function? No. There is no return statement. So your assumption might be that it returns nothing because there's no return statement. Well, JavaScript has a kind of funny little behavior, and that is, if your function has no return statement, it still returns a value.
Couldn't you go like dig a little deeper, because the print line is part of the print function. Like the print line returns the print function, which then tells you to get the value of the output box, didn't it?
Well, the println statement actually outputs whatever you have inside of its parentheses. It outputs that to our output box, right? We all agree to that? So indeed, it's going to do that. It's going to print the add and add 3, and it's going to say error message, you know, bad input to add. But what the heck is going on when I say print and I give it this to print? Well, what does a function return that doesn't have a return statement? It does return a value. And you've seen that in Code Academy sometimes. You're like, what the heck? Where did I get that? All functions return a value in JavaScript. If you do not have a return statement, that means the function call, you didn't give it a value to return. Well, what's the value in JavaScript that means no value?
No.
Undefined. Remember what I told you? If you don't give a variable a value, it has a value. What's that value? Undefined. Same thing with a function. A function will always return a value. Let's see what happens when we run this. It printed undefined because that's what the println statement function call returned. It returned undefined and println printed it. Notice it did print the bad input first. Why did it print the bad input first? Because it had to evaluate this function call here to know what to print. Remember, when you call a function, it goes off on a little side trip, does that function, and then returns a value back. So here's the function call. It went off and did this add, which just has the 3, which gave us the bad input to add error message. And then that function returned a value, because all functions return a value, but what was the value that function println call returned? It returned undefined, which was then printed by this call to println. Seems kind of funky, huh? Functions return a value. Now, another way I could have demonstrated this to you is I could have declared a variable. Let me get rid of the extra set of parentheses I have here. I could have declared a variable, stuff, let's say, and assigned the return value of println to that variable. Now that might make more sense to you, because what did I say? All functions return a value regardless of whether you get a return statement or not. This is a quirk of JavaScript. This is not true in Java, it's not true in C++, it's not true in C#, it's true in JavaScript. And then I could say println stuff. Maybe that makes more sense to you. What I'm doing here is exactly the same as what I had before. If I run this, it'll behave exactly the same. So my println statement actually did return undefined. And that's why sometimes when you write a little function in Code Academy and they ask you to check it out, and you do, and then it prints undefined on the screen, you're like, where did that undefined come from? It's because function calls in JavaScript always return a value, even if you don't explicitly return a value. So I'm just telling you this just to be aware of this. In most cases, you're going to call functions that actually return explicitly a value. And you're not going to try to print or use the result of a function that's returning undefined. What can you do with the undefined value? You really can't do anything with that value. So if I tried to do something like, oh, let's print stuff plus hello. Okay, well, it concatenated it on in that case. Kind of weird, you know. What's undefined? You're not usually going to do something with the undefined keyword. It usually indicates an error has occurred. You know, you get back undefined generally, and you're going, ooh, something went wrong. I didn't want to get back undefined. I was expecting to get back a number or a string or something like that I could actually use. So that's just a little demonstration that all functions return values. I put a little comment here. All functions do return a value. In this case, undefined. Now, let's go ahead and try something a little different. Now that we seem to know kind of how to create a function and how to use that function, let's do a little practice using this basic concept, but experimenting with some other capabilities in JavaScript that are, as it turns out, quite useful. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this Go to Go1, and I'm going to create a brand new Go function. So here we have a brand new Go function. Real quickly, I'm going to put a little print line in here to make sure everything's working. Again, I cannot stress enough to do this on a regular basis, just to double check and see what's happening. So I'm feeling pretty good that my little Go function is working, so I'm going to get rid of that statement. I don't need it anymore. And let's go ahead and grab something from our input box. So we're going to say var user in is set equal to get input, and we want to grab it from in1. And so real quickly then, let's go ahead and print line the user in just to make sure our input capability is working. So I write an input statement. I'm telling it to get from input box 1, and I immediately print it out just to make sure that that input interaction is working properly. So I come up here and put my text or something in input box 1 and run it, and I see that it echoes it back out, and again I'm reassured that that part is working properly. Now some of you might think, dude, this is awful tedious to keep typing extra stuff we don't need. And I'll tell you what's tedious, not doing this. And then having an error in your program that's not working properly, and you're scratching your head all over the place, and you got to back up 5 steps to find out where that error is. So we know that our line 19 here that's doing input is working properly because we're able to echo that value back out. That's fantastic. Now, before I go any further, I keep saying to myself, you know, this is in1 and in2, and I look up here on my input boxes, and there's no label on my input boxes. So I'm going to go ahead and put some labels on my input boxes just to kind of remind me of what the hell's going on, okay? So I'm going to go over to my HTML, and I'm going to put some labels on my input boxes. So here's my input box 1, and right in front of that input box 1, I'm just going to put the label there to remind me of what that label is. So I'm going to put in1 there, and you'll notice on the screen it shows in1. That's helping me remember what those things are called. And then I'm going to put in2 on this one. And so I type in2 in a space right in front of my input boxes in my HTML, and it shows up very nicely right there. And I could continue this if I wished by actually coming down here and typing maybe a label in my output box here. So I'm going to put output colon and then do a BR right there. And notice now my output box has a nice little output just above the output box. It, again, is just a nicety, you know. I'm just jazzing up my user interface slightly here to make it look a little bit more kind of what's going on. Paul, question?
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out with the HTML how to add a tag because I'll have instructions that are different links to enter in, and so the boxes are all offset. This is just coincidence that they're the same amount of characters as before, but is there a tab in HTML? I couldn't find it where it said the spaces.
Well, I don't mess with that much, but I would probably use CSS to solve that problem. And so right now for this class, if you want to really make your user interface look pretty, start learning some CSS. The Code Academy CSS tutorial is a pretty good one for introduction to CSS, and probably you can figure out a lot of nice things without spending a lot of time on that.
I'll be honest, pretty.
Yeah, you can use a pre-tag, and then it'll not screw with your formatting. That pre-format is what pre-tag means. That's one idea. But again, that's kludgy. Using the pre-tags, the lazy person's route for really making a nice looking web page. Okay, so we just did that a little bit. I was just bugging me a little bit. So we're back in our JavaScript. So what I would like to do then is I'd like to start exploring a couple of things. And what I want to explore is I want to start exploring some string functions. Now when I talk about string functions, I'm going to JavaScript string functions. JavaScript has a wide variety of string functions built into the language. So I just searched for JavaScript string functions, went to the W3 Schools JavaScript string methods, and you're going to notice that they start giving us some examples of various methods that are available in the JavaScript string. So here's this function called index of. They tell us finding a string in a string. Okay. And they show us a little example of that. So I'm just going to scroll down, and we're going to do just a little cursory overview, kind of a high-level view of some of these. So there's one function. They show last index of, and they talk about how that refers to finding the last occurrence of a string within a string. So they also then refer to the search method for finding a string in a string. So you're seeing that we got a lot of variety here for looking for a string in a string, a little discussion of these things. This next part talks about extracting chunks out of a string. So they refer to 3 different methods for extracting a piece of a string. So we have the slice method, and they talk a little bit about that. A bunch of examples, substring, and you'll notice it's a little confusing. There are 2 substring methods, which is a little bit confusing to say the least. They're spelled just slightly differently, and they actually have a slightly different behavior. So my suggestion, to tell you the truth, for this class, if you're trying to take a chunk of a string, to tell you the truth, my attitude is learn how to use slice. And just ignore the other 2. Now we could explore the other 2 here just to kind of see that they do have differences, but the slice method is a very powerful method for grabbing a piece out of a string. And I would say learn that one, and you're pretty much good to go. Now the only issue with slice is that some languages don't have slice, whereas almost every language on the planet has substring of one sort or another. But again, if you learn how to use slice, it's not hard to learn how to use the Java substring method or the C++ or the C# substring methods. The slice is really nice. So my recommendation is focus on slice for grabbing a piece of a string.
Well, I mean, same idea.
They're all the same idea. They grab a chunk of the string. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to explore this a little bit. So let's just take a look at slice here for a minute. It says that it extracts parts out of a string and returns the extracted part. It tells us how many parameters it has. Notice it says it takes 2 parameters, the starting position in the string and the ending position in a string. Well, that's pretty simple. And then they show us an example here, and they say, okay, string.slice. So our string here is apple, comma, banana, comma, kiwi. That's just a single string. Don't, get freaked out by the fact that they've got commas in there. It's just a string of a bunch of characters. And they say we want to slice from position 7 to position 13. Now let's actually take a look at that, because they say that if we go 7 to 13, we're going to get the word banana. So that means that this position where the B is must be position 7. So we want to double check and see how they got that. So if I start counting here at apple, with A, and I just start counting normally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the comma, 7 for the space, 8 for the B, there's a disconnect there, right? It didn't work. So that implies they must have started counting at 0. Now this is not natural for most of us to start counting at 0. It's extraordinarily natural for computers. Most programming languages support the idea of start counting at 0. So again, if I start counting at 0 with the A, it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the comma, 6 for the space, 7 for the B. Oh, okay. Well, that'll explain then why I started with the B in my answer here. Now let's keep counting. So if B is 7, then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 is the comma. So if 13 is the comma, slice must do what? Yeah, it doesn't include the 13 character. It starts at 7, but goes up to, but does not include the 13th character. So it goes up to the character just previous to that 13th character. So that's an important thing to recognize. Just by looking at this example right here, we can determine that that's how slice is going to work. Now let's go ahead and see what this says. If the parameter is negative, ooh, you can use negative parameters. The position is counted from the end of the string. So to give a little example, if you omit the second parameter, the method slices out all the way to the end of the string. So if you don't include the second parameter, it'll give you back the rest of the string. They give an example of slice with a single parameter. And then they give us a little heads up that Internet Explorer 8 and earlier, it does not work. And do we want to ignore that? Well, if you're a professional web designer, can you ignore Internet Explorer 8 and earlier? No, because there are a lot of users out there still foolishly using Internet Explorer and Internet Explorer 8 and earlier, which is a little hard to believe, but yeah, there's a bunch of them. Now this would be an example of where you'd want to use jQuery, because jQuery is designed to work with almost every browser still out there. And they have code in the jQuery library that says, oh, they're using Internet Explorer 8, I got to do something a little different. And they take care of that for you. And so there is a way to slice using jQuery that will basically protect you from all the various browsers out there. That is one of the primary reasons people use jQuery, because jQuery takes notice of the particular browser the user is using. We're not going to go there. If you want to learn the basics of jQuery, again, Codecademy has a nice introduction to jQuery and its use. Start reading it. That's not this class. You're starting to get a sense, I think, though, that if you want to become a real web developer, you got to learn jQuery. You got to learn CSS. You got to know HTML, which is not hard, and you got to know JavaScript. There are a lot of technologies involved in creating a web application. I was reading an article this weekend about creating iOS apps. iOS is not the most widely used mobile application environment, but they're talking about how gaming is moving to these mobile platforms in a big way. Game developers. More mobile games now, I think, are downloaded and used on a regular basis than platform games or PC-based games. And so a lot of game developers, of course, are going there because there's a lot of money. And they were talking about these guys, oh my God, it's the most ridiculous thing. You know, it's kind of like winning the lottery, though, right? They upload something like, what is it, 100,000 new apps a day on the iOS store. I mean, it's some ridiculously huge number. So if you create a game and upload it, how are people going to find your new cool game, right? I mean, trying to get traffic to that game can be hard, like trying to get a YouTube video to go viral. Well, they talk about these guys that write a game, and you know, they're like, oh yeah, this guy wrote this game in his spare time. You know, he did it in 2 months. And oh yeah, he's doing $300,000 a week in sales. And it's just one guy. You know, it's like what? Yeah, it was crazy talking about it. And so there's a huge amount of money being made in mobile gaming, only because the mobile platform is so readily available to everybody. You know, you find yourself a little bit of time on your hands and off you go playing the game. Or some of these mobile games are getting very compelling. They're very sophisticated. with, you know, platformer features, if you will, because you have quad-core processors now in most of these, you know, state-of-the-art mobile phones. The graphics capabilities and the CPUs are getting better practically on a daily basis.
iOS games don't seem like that though. Like you find a lot of iOS games that are exactly the same, like 100 different games that are exactly the same. Do you see people just copying someone else?
So the impression I'm getting from you is that you're sort of casting aspersions on iOS games. Okay, that's all well and good. You know, especially if you're a platformer or you're a PC gamer and you're using state-of-the-art video cards, you think these mobile platforms are pathetic. Well, go ahead and think that, but if you want to be a developer and make yourself a boatload of money, more money is being made on mobile game platforms right now than on platforms or PCs. They talked about something like $27 billion last year. It's a huge amount of money. Regardless of whether you like the platform or not, I don't care. That has nothing to do with it. You're writing these things, most people are, to make money. But I would counter by saying that the CPUs and the graphics capabilities of mobile platforms are getting better every time they release them. And they are very sophisticated. And to suggest otherwise is just ignoring the reality.
Well, no, I'm not saying that like the phone is not sophisticated. I'm saying that the games that come out on the phone are not.
Well, that's why most people aren't getting rich. Because, yeah, you know, you see a game and you go, oh, cool, I'm going to make a knockoff of that game. Well, generally, how many people are going to go to a knockoff when they're happy with the first one that came out, right? They're going to say, I need something new and innovative. And so what it really boils down to, and this is so true, is your creative ability, your ability to innovate and be imaginative. And that's where the bottom line is in today's world. Because if you're innovative and imaginative, you are going to succeed. Because innovation and imagination is where the bottom line is. If you're simply doing the same old, you know, nobody cares. You know, think about the YouTube videos that, I mean, people watch YouTube videos a lot. And there's huge amounts of money in that. I made some YouTube videos for an online class over 3 years ago for just one online class. It was VBA. And they weren't perfect. It was the first time I taught the course online. I made some videos. They weren't perfect. I get like every 2 or 3 months I got another $100 from Google because I monetized them all. And I haven't touched those videos in 3, maybe 4 years. And I get $100 in my checking account. And I'm like, oh, look at that. Oh, I can go out to dinner. I got $100 from Google. And I'm like, what the heck? You'd think I'd just quit my day job and start making videos. And I'll tell you right now, and you can't go talking to these people about it because they aren't going to give you an answer. Ralph Phillips is making a lot of money on YouTube. Dan Alberghetti is probably making a ginormous amount of money on YouTube. And he will not tell you how much money he's making on YouTube. But he has a lot of videos out there. They're good videos, and they're on a lot of technical topics that people need help on. And all you got to do is have some imagination and creativity. Every one of you can make money just doing videos. You don't even have to. You don't have to know how to program. All you have to do is know how to make a video. Get yourself an inexpensive camera. You don't have to have a fancy camera. I got a $300 camera that shoots HD video really well. Now, if you really get into it and you're really good at it, you buy a higher-end camera and you get, you know, a higher quality video editing software. And you really go to town. I can't tell you how many people quit their day jobs. You go out there and look at some of these, you know, videos of funny stuff that people are doing, and they get 1 million hits. You get 1 million hits, you get a big check. You get a big check. You get 50 million hits, yeah, you have quit your day job. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I don't know if most people actually really connect to this. It's really easy to make a video and upload it to YouTube.
I took that 178 class last time with Ralph. Pretty great. Pretty simple, too.
It's very simple. In my 120 class, I get students extra credit for shooting a video, and half the time I get a student whips out their smartphone, takes a video of me talking for 5 minutes, uploads it, and gets the extra credit. You know, I'm like, no, wait a minute. I don't want to be on YouTube on your video, but it's just that easy. And so it's all boiling down into your imagination and your creativity. people who have some creativity and are willing to actually spend the hard work and time to be imaginative. It's not like it's easy to be imaginative and innovative. It's hard work, but there is serious money in that. And that's where the world is actually moving. We're seeing more and more people become individual entrepreneurs. More and more people are working for themselves. Now this causes a bit of a problem because you don't get the nice benefits and whatnot that working for a company gives you, and you don't have that kind of protection. But you do have this freedom to be creative and be innovative and make your own success, if you will. We're seeing a lot of that. And so it's the same story in web application design. You got to learn these technologies before you can apply your innovation, your creativity. You got to learn these technologies. That's one reason why I mentioned YouTube. I think it's a little bit easier to create a video than it is to create a web application, and it's much easier to create a web application than it is to create an iOS game or some other app. It doesn't have to be a game. But at the same time, Apple has come out recently, if you're interested in pursuing that and maybe not making a web application, but Apple has recently released the Swift programming language, and it has made iOS programming much easier. It has made iOS programming much easier than it was with Objective-C. Objective-C was not the simplest programming language in the world by a long shot, but Swift is much better. Now, the ideas that we're learning in this class, the ideas of if statements, the ideas of using variables, creating functions that have parameters, that's all in Swift. Most of the ideas we're learning in this language could be used in Swift, and you could just continue on learning the additional syntax and ideas in Swift. The problem with Swift, and it's a huge problem, I lost my bin. The problem in Swift is you got to have a Macintosh. Right now, you can't program Swift for iOS apps without a Macintosh. So anyway, back to where we were. We want to try some string functions, and we're going to try some slicing. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the user input something into the input box, and then we're just going to do a little slicing on it. So I want to write some functions, though, to practice using functional notation, just to practice using functions, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to write a function that kind of acts like slice, but it's going to use slice to do its job. And so we're going to just go ahead and write this slice function of our own, if you will. So we're going to call it, function, and let's call it, I don't know, what are we going to call this? I don't know what to call it. I don't want to call it slice because we can't use it. I like chop. Chop. Look, perfect. I like that. Very good. Thank you. We're going to do chop, and what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a string, and we're going to pass in a count, and what our function is going to do, we're going to write a little comment here at the top of our function. We're going to say pass in a string and a number, and it's going to return the first number of characters from the string. So we're going to pass in the string, and we'll pass in the number 1, and we'll get back the first character in the string. Now, sometimes with a comment, they'll actually show an example of its use. So I could say chop, and I could pass in ABC, and I could pass in 2, and my result is going to be what?
What? Oh, the string is your first one. Oh.
It says return the first number of characters. So if you substitute 2 in for the word number, what would that sentence read? It says return the first 2 characters, right? what would be the first two characters? AB. Obviously, my comment is a poor one, because many of you read that comment and had no idea what I meant. But as long as I put in the answer here, now, does that help understand what the comment says? But you notice how giving an example of calling the function and what the function returns helps a user understand what your function does. Obviously, my language use there was not that helpful for many of you. And that's a problem with natural language. Natural language can be misinterpreted very easily. It's a huge problem, as anybody that's ever had a conversation with a friend and kind of gotten into an argument. Usually it's because there's a lack of understanding going on. So now we have this notion then of what's going on here. So we want to just use return, and we want to use slice on our string. So we say string.slice, and then we have to specify what we want in the parameter list of slice. So if we want to return the characters from the beginning of that string, what do we have to put as the first parameter in our call to slice? 0. That's right. 0 is the first character of a string. And if we wanted to specify how many characters to return, so for instance, in this particular case, if I wanted to return AB, what would I have to put in there? If I put in 2, what would I get back? AB, right? So if the person passes in that they want 2 characters, just like in my example there, I could use that number they passed in, my count variable, just directly. I don't have to do anything with it. I can just say count, right? Just say count. So let's think about it before we actually run it. Let's think about it. What if the user passes in ABC and a 1? What will they get back? Okay, I just got 2 answers from you.
Oh, into the function.
They call the function chop and pass in ABC and a number 1.
1.
Okay. How many people think I'll just get A?
Oh.
Okay, how many people think I'll get something other than A? Well, what do you think I'm going to get? I'm going to get AB or B? Just B by itself? Say what?
You're going to get BC.
You think I'm going to get BC? Okay, let's talk about it before we run it. Now, what does slice specify? If we actually look at the slice definition in the language. Let's take a look at the specification for slice. It says, returns the selected elements. Oh, that's for the array slice. I don't want array slice. I want string slice. All right? Arrays also have slice. String slice. Oh, this is MDN. That's cool. The zero-based index at which to begin. That tells us where to begin, right? Everybody good with that? Well, where did we tell it to begin? At 0. So if it's going to begin at 0 with ABC, am I going to get BC by itself or B? I'm almost guaranteed to get at least what? The A, because I'm telling it to start at 0. So I'm going to get the A, because I'm telling it to start at 0. And if they pass in 1, well, let's go look at that definition again. The second one is the ending slice. All right, it says the begin extraction, right? And then the end slice, which it does say is optional, the zero-based index at which to end the extraction. If omitted, it extracts to the end of the string. If negative, is blah, 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 blah. It says where to end the extraction. We know that it will not include that character, though, right? Here's an example. Slice 4, and then they use -2, unfortunately. I wish they wouldn't have used negatives there. That's unfortunately negatives. We'll look at those. They're very cool. but it's a little bit confusing. All right, so if I say, if I say 0 and 1, I'm going to get what? How many people think A? We brought most of you on board with that one. Okay, cool. So let's call chop and find out what happens. So I'm going to say chop in my print line statement right on my go, and I'm going to use the user input, and I'm going to chop, and I want 1 character. So if in my input up here I type ABC, and I say chop user input with 1 character, we're all saying we should get what? The A. Let's see if we get the A. And we did. Perfect.
Next question. What's this parameter count? Well, I'm not getting it.
Okay, let's go back to our actual call to chop.
Okay.
Here is my call to chop. They refer to these as the actual parameters, and my actual parameter is a string and a number. Right? Now when I call chop, where is this actual parameter for this user in going to go? Where is it going to go? No. Okay, here's a function call, right?
Yeah.
When I call that function, where is the value, where is this string going to go when I call this function? It goes to the function.
Okay.
Here's my function.
Okay.
Here's my formal parameter list.
Okay.
It has 2 parameters.
Yeah.
Where is that string going to go when I call my function chop? It's going to go into this placeholder right here, right? So the string that's here is going to go into that placeholder. Let's go back and look at our earlier example down here with add. When I call my add function, I pass it 2 numbers. Where does the first number, there's an example right there. Where does that -4 go when I call add?
Number 1.
It goes into that parameter num1. Remember, it's by position in the parameter list. Where does this 15 go? It goes into the second parameter. That's right. So up here in our example, I call chop. I have 2 parameters. There's my first one. It's a string. Where does it go when I call chop? It goes down to string. Here's my second parameter. It's a number. Where does it go when I call chop? It goes into count. So in this particular case, the user input string is going to show up down here in this variable. The 1 is going to show up down here in this variable. They are then used in this call to slice. So here's the string. Whatever string is passed in is the string that's going to be used with my call to slice. Here I'm saying start at the first character of that string that's passed in. Here I'm saying go up to but do not include character at position count. Well, in this particular place, count is 1, so count gets substituted in there, function called substitution. You good?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody good? I'm glad you asked. This is important. This is something that people find difficult. That's why I'm spending so much time on it up front, because everything we're going to do with programming is going to be done with functions. We're going to be writing functions. So in this particular case then, it passed in the ABC that I have here in the user input. It said slice ABC starting at position 0 up to but not including character in position 1, which would have been the B. So it gave me back only the A. If I put a 2 in here, what am I going to get? You betcha. I'm going to get AB, because it'll go up 2 but not include the character in position 2. Now again, that's that zero base thing that it's confusing. In other words, A is in position 0, B is in position 1, and C is in position 2. Slice will not include the character in that last index position. So it only starts at 0, goes up to, but excludes the character in this last position. All right, include everything up to, but not that one. All right. So we now have a function that will chop the beginning of a string. Let's change the name of it to chop start. Chop start. Now what that does then is it tells us that it just chops the starting part of a string. So if you knew that, let's say for instance that you had something like Bob Smith, you know, and you say, okay, using my chop start, I want to capture just Bob. How would I do that? If I just want to capture Bob. What would I use for the number to just grab Bob? Yeah, 0, 1, the 0 is in position 1, the B is in position 2, the space is in position 3. All right, so I ought to be able to grab user input, pass in a 3, oops, and it should grab Bob. Let's try it. Bob Smith, click, and it did. Let's jazz this up a little bit since we actually have 2 input boxes. Let's jazz this up a little bit. Instead of hard coding the 3, let's allow the user to specify that for input box 2. All right, so var user in 2 equals get input, and we'll pass down input 2 so that we can grab a value from input box 2. And we just said get input and give us the name of that input box, and it'll go to that input box to get whatever's in that input box, and we'll stash that in user in 2. Now I'm going to use this variable that I've just added to my program, and I'm going to use that as my second parameter here on my call to chop start. So now I can put in Bob, and I can test it out by saying, well, if I put a 3 in there and I have Bob Smith, I ought to just grab Bob, right? Yeah, perfect. Now, let me just say something. When we start working with string functions like this, the fact that it's zero-based strings, I can guarantee you that's going to screw you up. It screws me up. I've been using zero-based strings for 30 years, and I still forget. And I get screwed up, and I go, oh, whoops, of course. I know where the error is pretty quickly. So zero-based strings are not something you're used to. And so generally what I'm constantly doing is I'm saying, all right, if I'm getting screwed up by this, and maybe it's a little more complex function, you know, I'm gonna say to myself, what the heck's going on? And I'm gonna draw myself a picture. I can't tell you, if you were sitting in my office at home right now and you looked at my desk where my computer is, you're gonna see so many little, I have little yellow notepads, little small ones, you know, and those things are strewn all over the place. I just throw them away, you know. You never know when you want to go back and look at one, right? And they're just all these pages, I'm just tearing them off. And now I have one of these little cubes, you know, tear off notes. And now I'm using that. So I got those things, they're just like piling up all over the place. I'm constantly going to pen and paper. So when I say 3, well, I'm saying to myself, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the character positions of the string. And so if I say 3, I know it's going to go up and include 0, 3, everything not including the 3. So it's going to get position 0, 1, and 2. And I draw myself a picture like this. Jarny Struska, the guy that developed the C++ language, in the textbook I'm using for my programming students, says, don't think that it's some sign of, you know, incapability if you have to get your paper and pencil out and start writing stuff down on paper and pencil. Put your ego aside if you're having problems with that. Get your paper and pencil out. So, what if I wanted to see Bob space X? All right, let's try 5. Bob space S. There we go. What if I put a 0 in there? What am I going to see? And we got nothing, but how do I know I got nothing? Well, what if I put a 1 in there? Ah, got a 1 line. So I did get nothing on that 1. What if we try something like this? Now, remember, we're diving off the deep end here a little bit. it said you could do negative numbers. But, ooh, what's going to happen if I put a 0 and then a negative number? That's going to be kind of weird. What if I put -1 in there? Very good, Bob Smith. It's basically saying that that second parameter is not how far to go in from the left, it's how far to go in from the right. So I said go in, all the way up, but not including, one character on the end of the string coming in from the right. And so that's kind of strange, So, let's just do a -4 here. So you see there's two ways to accomplish that same task with Bob S. You could specify coming in from the right or how far over to go on the left. All right, let's try another function. With this idea in mind, let's try writing another function called chop end. Whoa-wee. That's kind of different. Okay. I know what was going on there, but I didn't expect it to happen then. And chop end, and we're going to pass in a string, and we're going to pass in count again. We're just going to use that same variable name. No problem with that. And I'm going to copy my comment that I could have copied the whole function, for heaven's sakes. I should have done that. I'm going to paste this comment right there at the top, pass in a string and a number, return the last number of characters, and I just screwed things up a little bit there. I know why I did it. Ooh, I didn't put it all on the same line there. So return the last number of characters from the string. So if I say chop A, B, C, what should I get back if I get the last number of characters from the string? Say it louder. BC, that's right. I should get the last 2 characters in the string. So why don't you spend just a minute and see if we can write that function. In fact, why don't we, since we've been going a while here, why don't we take a little 5-minute break, and during that 5-minute break, or a little longer, try to write that function.
No. And what are we supposed to do? Write a function that does what?
So mine's a text area, and I only wanted to input numbers. Right now I'm checking the value, and it's not a number, it just subtracts one character, and it's using the dog on key up, so it calls the function every time you text. Is there just a way, because there's some flag where you can see the letter and then it deletes the functions, does it? Is there some HTML thing that I can just...
I am pretty sure there's a way you can keep the keystroke from actually hitting the text box.
Really? Okay, so you won't even be able to...
So that, in other words, before it gets rendered in the text box,
yeah.
it doesn't do it. In fact, I think I've researched this before.
Yeah.
But it's, God knows, Dark Ages stuff, right? JavaScript, input box, disable keystroke. How can I disable all keyboard keys? How to disable keyboard events on input box? See, this is not really what we want to do, but it might refer to it. This looks like a JavaScript. This looks like a jQuery thing. Okay, so they have this. Okay, so I want you to notice what they're doing here on this one. There apparently is an event that's passed to a function on the keyboard keystroke, and the E here, stop propagation, looks like that would keep it from happening. In other words, you could put that behind an if statement, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I'm passing
something weird like that.
I'm passing the event. That's how I'm figuring out.
Are you using the stop propagation?
No, I just use like a Boolean function. It just turns true or false, and then it.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking is you need to invoke this to get the actual key not to show up in the text box.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just winging it here first, but that's something to try.
Yeah.
It says here returning false from the key press handler. You created an on key press handler?
No.
Well, it looks like if you create an on key press handler and return false, it keeps the key from also the little character from hitting the text box. Anyway, according to that.
Okay.
So this is what I always wind up having to do, though, is, dig around. Oh, here's one, keyboard text input filtering. That sounds like something you might like. So for form validation stuff. And they're using regular expressions. Oh boy. Yeah, I mean this looks like a pretty good search for JavaScript keyboard input filtering, or this is javascripter.net. I don't know, probably easier just to search for this.
Okay.
But that looks like a pretty good website.
I'm doing a thing with just two text boxes, still sets the Fahrenheit, and it just updates them automatically. There's no time.
You type in the number, and immediately the other one's showing you the result of that number. Yeah.
It's like the one on Google.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's great. Did you do negative 42 yet, or I think it's negative 42?
For what?
The conversion from Celsius to Fahrenheit? Negative 41?
Oh,
negative 40.
Negative 40?
Yeah.
Oh, mine? Where is it?
Yeah.
Minus 32 times 5 minutes.
Yeah, but just try those temperatures. So if you type in negative 40? Yeah, negative 40. I like to test that one. That one sort of answers all questions, right?
Oh, negative not negative. And it's a negative key, it's not a number, right?
Right.
Well, we want the last two.
Yeah, see, that's where you start getting into that kind of filtering. You start looking for stuff like that. And if
I just need to find the.
If you allow that, you can only allow that as the first character.
I have the event, and I'm trying to find the like the AS.
The ASCII.
Yeah. Thing. So I have like in a statement that just it's not a big one. It's just less than or equal to than the 0 and 9. So I'm just have to add that the minus symbol.
Yeah. But you wouldn't really like to allow them to type it twice. But that's getting a little carried away.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I hope that.
And it has to be the beginning of the string. But that's fun. That's fun to challenge yourself on simple things like that. You could probably find a piece of code that would do that, but it's still fun to write it. Okay, so did we get a chop end running? Was it pretty easy? The basic idea is you want to tell it where to start, and then it's going to grab the rest of the string, right? And using slice, you can specify where to start with the first argument, right? And then what happens if you leave off the second argument? It gives you back the rest of the whole string if you just leave off the last argument. So basically all we need to do is use our same function we used above with a little twist. We're just going to say return string.slice and just say count. And what that does, it's kind of a bad variable name now because it doesn't specify how many characters. What does that count really mean now? What's the meaning of that variable in our function?
How far into it you start.
Yeah, how far into it you want to start. How far in. So it would be better to maybe call that start. And then you can specify where to start, and it returns that many characters. Now, that really is not doing what I told it to do, though, is it? Because we want to allow them to specify how many characters. So I guess I just made a mistake there. I just made a mistake. Because that really doesn't do what I said I wanted it to do. I said pass in a string and return the last number of chars. So what I need to do here is let them pass in the last number of chars. Like they could pass in 2, right? And they want the last 2 characters. Oh, okay. So how do I get them to get the 2 just with what I have here? I'll have to add one small thing. Put a minus sign in front of that. Yeah, very good. Very good. Put a minus sign in front of that. And that should do it, right? It should say minus count. So if they say 2 characters, well, it would say -2. It'll come in -2 characters off the end of that string and give them the rest of the string. Who knows if that's going to work, but I'm going to try it up here in my go function. I'm going to change it to start end, chop end, I mean. And I'm going to let the user input 2 strings. Okay, so let's go ahead and give that a whirl. So I'm going to just put in A, B, C, D, and I want to say I want the last 2 characters, and it didn't work. So I made a boo-boo. Shouldn't have to. Oh. The simplest thing. I didn't put a number here. Oh, did put it the first time. All right. String dot slice.
I really easy different.
Now, what I do in a situation like this is I am going to quickly put a print line at the beginning of my function here, and just to see if my function, if it gets here. In other words, if it gets into this part of the function and actually gets here successfully, it should print hey, right? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and put some letters there, put a number there, and this time it worked. What? Okay, now I'm going to comment that out, put some letters here, put a number there, and then, whatever, it's working now. JSBin needed that little wake up. Let's try it again. A, B, C, D, put a number there, try it, worked. Let's try 2, worked. Let's try 1, worked. Let's try 0. What do you think 0 is going to do? So you think it'll print nothing? Print nothing?
Show up.
Are you saying it'll print nothing?
So you're not going to see anything.
Okay, that means print nothing.
Okay.
All right, so not the word nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll print. You'll see nothing. Okay. How many people think it's going to print nothing? Okay. Any other choices?
Blank line.
A blank line, that would be the same as nothing. What else? Anything else? Huh? How about the whole thing? Right, I told it, come in from the end, none, right? And I'm like, what? I just guessed that. I didn't know it was going to do that. I thought it might, but I'm not sure why I thought it might. But that was kind of funny. How about now we put in a -1? Now it's saying, negate the -1, you get 1, and so now it's starting at position 1 and going to the end of the string. Right? It makes sense if you know how slice works. If that makes sense. That's why when we put in 0, well, -0 is 0. There's no such thing as -0. And it said, oh, 0 is the starting position, and give me the rest of the string since we don't have a second argument, so it gave us the whole string, right? What if I put in something big like 6?
I think it'll just be A, B, C, D.
So the whole thing?
I don't think it'll wrap twice.
It's telling it to start at position 6. Is there position 6?
No.
No. So I ignored it and just gave us the whole thing. How about we try -6? Oh, that's way back past the beginning. Nothing.
Is there spaces after A, B, C, D?
No. Let's put the 0 in to make sure we got a blank line. Yep, we did get a blank line. So you're seeing that there are some situations where the user could give you bad input, and then it's going to behave maybe in strange ways. At that point, you might want to say to yourself, well, what should we do as programmers? In other words, what if the user gives us a string that doesn't have 6 characters, and they give us a count of 6? Or -6. I mean, what do we do? Well, one thing you can do is, well, let's see what they say up here. Do they give us any more? Extracts a string, return changes to the text string. Okay, extracts up to but not including. An example, where it ends saying, they don't tell us what it's going to do wrong if it gets that input, which is a little ridiculous. They should tell us what it's going to do wrong. Okay, let's try JavaScript string slice and see if the W3 schools gives us a little more information. Extracts parts of the string, use the start, the first character is position 0, last, the second is 1, okay. Use the negative number to select from the end of the string. If omitted, selects all characters, technical details, blah, 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 more examples. They give you a whole bunch of examples, which is nice. And then they say go to the JavaScript string reference. Okay, well, let's click on that. Okay, there's JavaScript strings, properties, methods. Okay, here's slice again. Okay, is this the same one? And optional, select technical details. Yeah, I think that's the same one that we were on before. So notice that there's nothing in the reference that tells you how it behaves when it gets inputs that are kind of crazy, like numbers that are outside of the range of the number of characters of your string and so on. So in many library routines, they'll tell you how it behaves if it gets values that are really kind of incorrect. This one gives us no information. Now, is there a reference for JavaScript? Official, OFFICIAL, JavaScript reference. And the end, no good. Developer, Mozilla, or JavaScript, and the Developer Network. I don't know why is there no official JavaScript reference. Okay, here it is. ECMA script. The official page of the script, edition 5. This is what all browsers, modern browsers, are targeting right now. The official ECMA script. That is what is JavaScript. They're kind of the same thing. They are now working on version 6. Some browsers are including some of version 6 capabilities. So this is the official website. The 5th edition has been approved. Documentation. Edition 5. Download. Let's just see. This might take a minute. Oh yeah, you see how it's downloading here? It's a pretty big document. This is the official documentation for ECMAScript. That is the guiding document for JavaScript. Version 6 is very close to being completed, I think. As you can see here, this is a ginormous document. Oh, notice that, in fact, we downloaded this and it says 6th edition, June 2015. Let's see if we can find a little bit of a table of contents here. Alrighty.
The one I wrote loops twice and then it stops looping.
Did you write a loop? What do you mean?
No, I mean, I can enter numbers longer than the length of the string, but only up to twice, because I think I set it from the top of the first one, and it can go all the way back through the negatives once.
And then the program fails and doesn't do anything at that point?
No, it prints out the whole thing after that.
Oh, it does seem to behave on it. But anyway, notice they talk about the string type here, page 17. Yeah, God knows, page 17. What are we on? Oh, we're on page I. Oh, really? Oh, whoops. We just went past the end there. So, over 500 pages. Okay, there's page 1. Let's see what they say about strings on page 17. And almost there. 60. The string type. So here's the official documentation of the string type. Notice they don't talk about the string functions here. I'm not sure where the string functions are mentioned. Oh my God. Anyway, not a trivial document to read. I have never spent any time reading it. String right there, page 304. 304. And we're close to... Let's see. Oh, way off from 304. And that's fine. So the differential there is about 20 pages. 324. Shoot, I'm still on. Oh no, that's 304. How come it's not showing me streams? Anyway, this is where you would go if you want the definitive definition. And you'll notice it's not the most trivial thing in the world to read. But it goes on and on, doesn't it? I might have to explore that for strings. Oh, there's some string stuff. Okay. So we now have two little functions, though, that actually do what we expect them to do, unless they get bad inputs. But we're not going to worry about it. We're going to assume that the user does the right thing. But now we have two little functions that actually are quite easy to use to solve this particular problem, and you don't have to know how slice works. And this is one reason why you might want to write yourself helper functions. Notice both of these helper functions are one-liners. In other words, they're not complex. They can be accomplished in one line. But it allows us to focus on what we want to do and not have to think about how slice works. Now, once you get good at using slice, then you wouldn't have a problem. You just say, I know how slice works, and you just go ahead and call slice and get the job done. But when somebody's reading your program, what if they don't really feel real comfortable with slice? And they come across a statement that says chop start or chop end, and maybe that means more than slice. So sometimes you can make your code easier to read simply by coming up with a better name. And you include that name when you're writing your code. And so when somebody's reading your code, it's easier for them to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish. because you came up with a better name for a function that maybe in the library, like slice, maybe you didn't think that was a very easy to understand name. There's nothing wrong with doing this, because your job one as a programmer is to do what? Make it easy to read. So whenever you're writing code, it's easy to understand what it is you're doing. So right here, chop end, user input, and maybe that's not the best name in the world. When I tried to come up with a name, I was stymied, but I liked chop. I thought that sounded pretty good. But you could have maybe called it extract start, or grab start, grab end, or copy start, copy end. Copy might actually be a good name because it doesn't change the original string. It copies those characters out of that original string and returns a brand new string. So copy might be a better name. I'm kind of liking it, to tell you the truth. And since I like it so much, I'm going to go ahead and change it. So in my code, I'm going to, right here I have this call to copy to chop, so I'm going to call that copy end. And then down here on my two functions that I actually use it, I'm going to go ahead and change the name from chop to copy. So now I can test that out again, make sure that's working still, and indeed it is. And now I have this nice copy. Now, I want to do one more thing and we'll finish the day on this one. Let me give you an example. What if I have something like this, and I say to you, I want to grab just the person's first name. Now, in that particular context, you could use our copy start, and you'd pass in what? 3, right? And it would work just great. But unfortunately, I can't just use 3 every time to grab the first name from the input box. What would I have to use here? I'd have to use 5, right? For my copy start. Well, let me just change my code and we can double check to make sure I'm not lying to you. Okay, copy start, and I'm going to put in, Billy Smith, and I want to grab just Billy, so that's 5 characters. Worked like a champ. But if I try to do the same thing with Bob Smith, not so good. So what I have to know is what? What would I have to know to be able to do this successfully?
Where the space is, you can go back.
If I knew where the space was, right? If I knew the position of the space, I can use that, right? Because what's the position of my space right there? No, the position of my space in that string is 3. Start counting at 0 at the beginning of the string. So if I know the position of the space, I can just use that value, and voila, I get the first name. So I have to have a tool that will tell me the position of a substring within my string. In other words, if I want to find a space, I can say, hey, could you tell me where that space is in the string? And so there is indeed a tool for that, and let's go ahead and take a look at that. And what I want is, where am I right here? I'm on the JavaScript string slice method. I want that. I want the JavaScript string methods, and here we are. And if we read this one right here, returns the position of the first found occurrence of a specified value in a string. And so if I specify the space character, it'll return the position of the first found occurrence of that space character. Now let's take a look at an example of this. We'll click on the name of the function, and here's an example. So we have this string right here, and it says find in that, given that string, using index of, find the position of welcome. So if we count all the characters, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 is the W in welcome. It returned 13. So let's try it ourselves and say we would like to find not the word welcome, but we would like to find the index position of the first space in that string. Well, the first space in hello world here is at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's in position 5. So let's take a look. And it tells me 5. So I can use index of on the string and say 5, and I get it. All right, let's go ahead and just work with that real quickly in my code here. So what I wanted to do then is I wanted to call copy start, given a string, and given a particular position, not the user's input, but the position of the user's input. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say var position, and I'll just abbreviate that to POS, okay? Not with the other meaning. Okay. Position, and I'm going to say user in, that's the string, dot index of the second user's input. So in this particular case then, I'm going to type in Bob Smith, and I'm going to type the space character. And so what it's going to do is it's going to say, go to the string Bob Smith, and look for the first occurrence of the space character. And if it gives me the first position of the space character, it's going to put it into that variable. And then when I call copy start, I want to go to that position that I found using index of. So I'll say use the string, but use the position to grab the start. So we're going to let the software kind of think about that. So I'm going to type Bob Smith in my input box 1. I'm just going to type a space character. I just hit the space bar. And then I'm going to click the click me button, and give me back Bob. Let's try Bobby Smith. And I still have the space character in my second input box there. You can't see it, but trust me, I just typed the space character and see if it gets it. Bobby, perfect. So I can type Bobby Joe Smith. Oh, cool. What if I type Bobby Space Joe Smith? What am I going to get?
Bobby.
Yeah, it's looking for the first occurrence of the space character. Oh. First occurrence of the space character. Oh, anytime I put a space in there, it looks for the first occurrence of the space character.
You don't put any, it will show all of it.
Say what?
You don't put any space, it will show all of it.
Oh. What happens if it doesn't find a space? Great question. It didn't quite show all of it. Ooh, what did it do?
Cut off the last letter.
It cut off the last letter. Why do you think it cut off the last letter? Now we're using splice in our copy start, remember. Why do you think it maybe cut off that last letter? I mean, why? What? Yeah, but what number would it have you had to have used to chop off that last one from the right? Yeah, but what actual number would chop off the last letter on the right? Say it louder. -1. -1 would make it chop off that last letter. So let me explain that to you. If index of does not find an occurrence of what you're looking for, what do you get back for your number? -1. -1 is what you get back if it does not find an occurrence. Let me give you an example. What if I put in, instead of a space, what if I put in capital J? What will I get if I put in capital J? I got in Bobby. That's right. What if I change it, though, to a capital X? There is no capital X, and so it won't find it, so I get back Bobby Joe Smith because it gives it a -1 when it doesn't find the character. So the behavior of index of is to return a -1 if the character is not found. Let's take a look at the definition and usage of this. Right, that says, this method returns -1 if the value to search for never occurs.
What's the reason behind that?
Well, let's say you're searching for a character, and you want the function index of to return something useful. Well, if it finds the character, what's it going to return? If it finds the character. No. Right here. It says it right here. It returns the position of that character it's found, or characters. It returns the position. Well, that position will always be a number in what range of values? 0 to the length of the string, right? -1, actually. But it'll always start at 0 because that's where the first character is. So let's say that you're designing this function index of, and you say to yourself, well, wait a minute, what if it doesn't find a character? I can't return a positive number, right? Because if I return a positive number, it implies what? It's the position of the found string. If it returns a positive number, if it returns 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, it implies it found an occurrence. And so since I can't return a positive number, the programmers of the function said, well, what should we return? And they said, we'll just return a negative number if it doesn't find it. And then they had to ask themselves, well, what negative number should we return? And of course, why would you return anything other than -1? Well, let's return -666 and really give them the right message, you know. So they said, let's just return -1 because it's the first negative number. And that indicates what, again?
That the character didn't find.
That what you were searching for was not found. That's right.
You feel like it's false, and if you find -1 in position, then the character not found.
Perfect. Perfect. You can put that in an if statement. You can say if index of some character equal -1, error message, couldn't find that, else maybe print it out on the screen or something. But that's how you can use that in an if test. You can look for that -1. If it didn't occur, then you got to do something else. So our example right here then basically says we're going to look for the space character, and by using that space character, we can grab just the first name. So why don't we do this? Let's write a function called first name. And we're going to just pass in the name. And we're going to put a little comment on here. It says pass in first space last name, return the first name. Now notice how we're specifying how this looks. I'm going to put it in a little differently. We're specifying that there's got to be a space there. So we can deal with the error if it doesn't find it. We can deal with that, and we can think about how to deal with that, and we'll all discuss that to figure out how to do that. So first things first, we got to look for the space. So we declare a variable, and I'll call it, space pause for space position, and I'll say take the name, do index of, and search for a space. So there is a line that says search for a space. And then we can put an if statement in. We can say if space pause equal -1, well, what could we return if we didn't find a space? Just some ideas. We could return a message saying, couldn't find space character, couldn't find first name. We could do that. What's another thing we could return? Yeah? What's something we could return that might actually be sort of usable?
Augment it, you could add to it, like say +2.
Take the name and add something to it?
We'll take the value, if it's -1, and change it for something usable, like 0.
Well, that wouldn't be very useful to a person calling first name. Okay, let me give you an example. What if they call first name and pass in Bob? What could you return? You could just return Bob, right? No space was found, just return the string. I'm kind of actually thinking that's a useful thing to do. Just return the string. If there's no space is found, just return the string that they gave you. And just say, we're just going to give you back the string. We couldn't find a space. So we're not going to try to work hard. So we're just going to say return name, just write that. Else, what do we want to return? Copy start, that's right, I named it copy start. You might have left yours chop start. And we're going to take name and pass it what? Our copy start is going to take the string, and what do we need to pass it? The position of the space, exactly. So let's say space pause right there. And now we have a function that we think will return the first name given a first name, last name. Well, let's give it a whirl. Up here in our go function, we'll just say instead, we're going to get rid of this copy start. In fact, I'm going to comment that out so we can leave that there. And now we can just print line, first name, and we'll assume it's in user in. We'll assume the user has entered first and last name in our input box 1. Okay? So we're going to assume that the user has just entered in input box 1, and we're going to ask for the first name of that input. So we're going to try it out with Bob Smith and see if it works. That's Bob. Let's try Bobby Smith. Got Bobby Smith. Let's give it a name without a space. We'll just do Bobby Smith completely. Got back the whole name. Hey, this is working like champ. I'm kind of digging this. How about if I say Bobby Joe Smith with 2 spaces? What should I get back? Should get back Bobby. How about they say, well, it's a hyphenated name, Bobby Joe Smith. Got back Bobby Joe. Our first name function is working like a champ. And so now, anytime I might be working with a user who's entering information in a text box like this, and I just want to grab their first name, look how easy it is. I just call my first name function. It grabs their first name, and it reads well. It's real obvious what we're doing there is we're grabbing the first name from that user input. Now, I'm going to stop on this since we're out of time. It would be a nice little thing to try to write last name, a function that would return the last name given the user input. And on that note, I'm going to stop. Keep those cards and letters coming. See you next time. Well, if you're using JSBin, it's being saved as you go.
If I'm logged in.
If you're logged in. If you're not logged in, copy and paste it into an email message, send it to yourself.
And then if I want to access it again?
Let me just show you. So we did all this work here. In fact, I'm going to change the date here because I forgot to change that date. So I'm going to change the date to July 13. Oops, can't change it there. It's on the HTML. I'm going to change it to July 13. And it should be good to go. Sometimes it makes me nervous. I often will hit run with JS, because it makes me nervous that it's not going to save it. And then let's say I bail out and I go home. Well, I know what the URL is. Well, I don't know what the URL is, but I'm going to fire up a different browser so we can see. Let's say I go home and I fire up my browser at home, and I go to JSBin and I log in. So I'll go ahead and log in here. Yeah, you've got to love that Internet Explorer. Well, I think this room seems to have kind of a delay on connection to the Internet. I'm not sure if the router's got a problem or something, Okay, PKC, CFCC.edu, password, log in, and then I go to my file menu and say my bins, and I look for the very latest bin, 57 seconds ago. Double click that, it opens up, and there we are, July 13, and all my code and everything's there. That's pretty cool, actually, when this works, when it's working. Let me see if Bob Smith works. Works like a champ. Cool. Question?
Yeah, there's 2 things I want to know about. Is there like a sum? I'm trying to get an array and sum the array.
Yeah, what you need to do is you need to write yourself a function It has a for loop that loops over all the elements of the array, adding them to a sum variable as it loops over the array and then return that sum. There's no sum that just takes the whole array and just magically adds it together. So if you're going to write yourself a function that's really short, use a for loop, loops over each individual element of the array and adds it to a accumulator. Yeah, save it to a local variable in the function, then return the sum from the function with a return statement.
Okay. What about a count?
To count the number of elements in an array,
Yes.
that's just a length property. So array named that length, just like a string.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, go look at the array reference and get some examples on arrays. Come on.
Yep. Oh, I have, definitely. Yeah.
If you can't make it work, let me know, okay?
Okay. I'm having a hard time just dropping my loop into an array. When basically I just define my variable like brackets, and I hope that makes it happen. I'm not getting commas separated with.
Let me show you an example, okay?
Okay.
Just oops, just turn that off. I'll pull that back on the overhead.
So yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time dropping my for loop into an array.
You don't drop a for loop into an array. Don't think that.
Okay.
You have an array, and if you want to manipulate the array, a for loop is a perfect structure to do that with. All right? So let's make a quick array here, and you'll see it come up in a projector just going.
Huh.
So here's kind of a classic example. I created an array just so I have something to work with, right? I didn't pass an array in. I just created one right there just for the example. So my array is called X. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements in it. So the length of that array is 6. I could print out the length of the array right here. I could say print line x.length. Right?
Yeah.
And it'll print out the length of the array. Right?
Yeah.
Then I have a for loop that starts with a new variable I, starting at 0. I is going to be incremented by 1 every time I go around the loop. I is going to go up to but not include the length of the array. So it'll go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the positions of the elements in my array, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time it goes around the loop, I say print the element at the ith location. I starting at 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. So it should print the elements in turn.
Yeah. I get that.
There it is.
Yeah. I'm just my array is coming from my for loop, and so I don't know the length of my array.
You can create an array with a for loop, but at the end of the for loop, you have an array, right?
Of every for loop, it's an array?
No.
No.
No. If you wanted to create an array, okay, I'll give you an example. Let's say I create an array variable here with an empty array. So I got an empty array, and I want to create an array with my for loop. Okay.
Your for loop.
All right, so I'm going to say y dot push. Push is a way to add something to the end of an array.
You just push the for loop.
No. I got to push a value. If I want to add a value to an array, I have to have a value. You don't push a for loop. A for loop is simply a control structure.
Yeah.
It's not a value. And so I do have values here, though. I have x as an array, and I have values in that array, right? So basically what I'm saying is take this value from array x and push it into y. So when I get all finished down here, I can print line y, and what's it going to print? What's going to be in array y?
It's going to be array x, pretty much.
Well, it'll have the same value in array x, because I'm pushing them from x into y, right? I mean, so it should print that. Let's go ahead and try it. And there they are, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But what I'm doing here is I created a brand new empty array, and the body of my for loop is just doing stuff. And one of the things it's doing is it's taking my array Y and adding an element on the end of that array every time it goes around the loop. Now, if I wanted to, I could just push I itself into that array. I'm not pushing anything related to X. I'm just saying take the value I, and what should it print?
That's what I'm after. That's the magic.
Okay, if I'm pushing I into that array, what's it going to print down here?
3, 4, 5, 6.
No. What does I start with?
0.
That's right. So that's the first thing I'm going to push. What's the next thing I'm going to push?
1.
1, then 2, then 3, then
5.
then 4, then 5. And there they are. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because I'm pushing I. And I is going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's all I is doing.
That's my.
So there's a difference between the value in the array and the value of the variable I. Those are two different things. Okay?
I think that's going to work. I've been working on that coefficient of rectitude, and I know how to generate. I know how to create a for loop that will count all the values. I just need somewhere for those values to go so I can use them.
So you can stuff them in an array in the body of the loop, and then return the array from the function
figure out how
file.
to do properly.
So push.
No.
For the temperature conversion assignment, do you have like a specific day you want that done, or?
Is that assignment week 4 assignment?
Yeah, it's this week, right?
We'll get it done sometime this week. So, you know, if you're staying on track.
Yeah.
If you're falling behind, then you're doing it next week or the week after. Okay. That makes sense?
I have so many questions. I'm going to ask.
I mean, seriously, I want my assignments page to make sense. So I want to, give me some feedback if you need help on that.
Something else I've really had problems with is when I created a for loop, I wanted all the values to come out with a two fixed number. I guess it's not necessary.
So you could do that in the body of the for loop. When you say two fixed and assign that two fixed value to the array where you're storing them all.
I kept trying to do that, but it stopped after the first.
Like if you say, well, like right here, so I've got my X values, right?
Yeah.
What if my I values? What if I say I divided by 3? Okay? So I know that when I run this, I'm going to get some weird numbers.
Yeah.
Well, what if on every one of those, instead of pushing I divided by 3, I say, well, how do you use two fixed? I forgot. You say number dot two fixed? Is that what it is?
No, it's just two fixed after the value.
Just plain old two fixed?
Dot two fixed.
Dot two fixed?
At
Oh,
the end.
okay. So I'm going to print change that. And then you say dot two fixed?
Yes.
And then say 1.
Yeah.
I got a missing parenthesis.
You're getting it just fine.
That's
was
cool. That was cool.
putting it in the array. So I was doing it after like a print line, for instance.
Yeah. So what this is doing is it's calculating what I want here and then pushing it.
Okay. Yeah.
Now I could have stuffed all that in a variable and then pushed the variable.
Mm-hmm. If I keep having problems with it, I'll let you know.
Yeah, send me some code.
And while you're still here, that interest problem, I got all that working and looking great, but I don't have my commas for the thousands place.
Yeah, no. I saw that email you sent me, and I haven't had a chance to look at that whole issue yet.
So I was considering, do I split it the same amount?
No. Do not even go there. Don't even talk to me about it, because I have no idea what I would do in that situation. What you're talking about is you would like to do some nice numeric formatting.
Yeah.